Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. Okay, so we're continuing our reading here on my second channel, Bibliophile Hermit, of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's Removal of Doubts book. Has commentary by Uthmain, highly educational. I think it's important to read his works because so many people talk about him, and us as reverts, it's important for us to read books ourselves instead of just hearing what everyone else says, right? Never trust somebody who judges a book they never read, slanders a scholar whose works they never studied, and slanders a class that they never took, right? You always want to be wary of people like that. So, this section, we are finally all caught up with how I was caught up. I used to read ahead and then go back and dissect it. But with these new sections, I wanted to kind of do raw, live reactions to the text, old school style, like I used to, with it. So, let's begin. Bismillah. Allah sent him to his people after they began to exaggerate in their reverence towards the righteous people. 1. Wad, Suwa, Yaguth, Ya'uq, and Nasr. Okay, so exaggeration of reverence towards the pious. Okay. 1. The righteous person, Saleh, is the one who fulfills the rights of Allah and the rights of servants of Allah. Okay, so I've heard this Saleh before, but I didn't really understand what it meant. So essentially what we get from this definition is that it's someone who is themselves pious and they fulfill the rights of other Muslims and of Allah. Number 2, the idols of the people of Noah, may Allah be pleased with him, were statues of some righteous men. Oh, I didn't know that. It has come to us in Sahih al-Bukhari, upon the authority of Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, that he said, I didn't know that. Okay, so righteous statues being built of righteous men. That happens today, except worse, criminals get idolized. These names once belonged to some righteous men from the people of Noah. When they died, Satan inspired the people to place statues with their names at the places where they used to sit. The people did so, but the idols were not worshipped until after the people who initially erected them had passed away, and the knowledge concerning why they were built was forgotten. Bukhari number 4636. Oh, that's really trippy. So, like, George Floyd has statues built to him now. He was a career criminal, a drug addict. He did porn. He held a gun to a pregnant woman's belly. He was not a role model for anyone, but because he swallowed the drugs and the officer put his knee on the back of Floyd forever, and he ended up having cardiac arrest from not getting to the hospital in fast enough time to reduce his overdose. People built statues to him, and there was a mural. Maybe you can do your research. I never saved it, but I watched plenty of Christians talk about this. But there was lightning struck a mural of George Floyd on a wall. You could Google lightning strikes George Floyd mural and you'll see it. And it's interesting how these leftists are building statues to some people who don't really deserve a statue. But what you get from this is we should avoid building statues in the first place because people might forget and start to worship them and think that they were some pious figure. This is interesting coming from an American perspective because, I mean, I've studied art history. Italians built statues. Statues of commemoration are a huge thing. And there's of Marcus Aurelius, of Heracles, Christopher Columbus, the conquistadors who came to America. There's quite a lot of statues in the world. But here, it brings us a unique point from Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, about the dangers of erecting such things. And archaeologists, they always assume something was worshipped whenever they find it. That always bothered me when I took archaeology classes, because they would always say, oh, they worship this. And there's this fat statue called the Venus statue of a fat lady, and feminists take that fat statue and say that the people of the past worship fat women. And it's just like, what are you talking about? It could have just been someone drawing and carving a fat woman. How do you know they worshipped it? So archaeologists constantly claim everything is worship. So it doesn't surprise me that Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, is mentioning this. Continues, this explanation is problematic because he states that, quote, these names once belonged to some righteous men from the people of Noah. From what is apparent from the Quran is that they must have been from a time before that of Noah, since Allah Azza wa Jal says, Noah said, my Lord, indeed they have disobeyed me, and follow the ones whose wealth and children will not increase them except in loss. And they contrived a great conspiracy, and they said, never leave your gods, and you should never abandon Wad or Suwa or Yaguth or Ya'uk or Nasr. Surah Noah 71:21 through 23. Wow. Well, that's very interesting. He gave us a hadith and a Quranic verse. That which is apparent from this ayah is that the people of Noah used to worship these idols, while Noah prohibited them from this. So the context here indicates everything mentioned in the explanation of Ibn Abbas, except that it is understood that these righteous men lived before Noah, and Allah knows best. Okay, wow. Dang. That really makes you start to think about how we today use the statues to commemorate things. Lots of people have speculated about the Statue of Liberty. I was taught by my dad that it's an occultic statue of Ishtar. It's a satanic kind of occultist commemoration, and if the Christians in America allow such a giant statue to be built, they said it was a gift from the French. I've seen the Statue of Liberty in person. It's quite large, but that is a huge idol, right? Quite large. And when the Italians, the Irish, and some Jews came over on boats in the 1920s, the first thing they saw when they came to America, when they're coming from a certain coast, right? They see that giant statue and they're like, oh, and they get this hope. It's quite interesting. Really quite interesting. How the Statue of Liberty became like a huge symbol of America and a form of worship. And that over time, maybe in 50 years, 60 years, you never know how stupid people can get if they don't read. You don't know how it goes. Archaeologists can be like, that was a giant god statue. Think about it. If they think these smaller statues were gods for the pagans and polytheists, who knows how they can rewrite history and delude the masses and contend that the Statue of Liberty was its own religion, which some people argue it is. Others have had theories that that statue is Lucifer and, more of a masculine woman. I've heard a lot of theories about the Statue of Liberty, so I won't go too deep into that. But it is quite interesting how Christians idolize the Statue of Liberty and the Republican Party, right? And some old school Baptist Democrats as well. And we don't seem to remember, as the American people, being both Muslim and Christian. You're not supposed to have these carved images, these idols. You're not supposed to do that. So I wonder one day what happened to that statue. And plenty of movies have made interesting films about what happens if that giant statue crashes in. You see a lot of end of the world videos. The Statue of Liberty is always ruined, destroyed. If I was a leader, I'd have it taken down and recycled. I would take it down. I'm a Muslim. that is a giant statue, I believe, has a cultic symbolism to the elite, and we are told a different story than what it means, so it should be taken down. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't, clearly the Statue of Liberty is haram, and we don't believe in liberty anymore in the American population. You can't even speak freely on apps, let alone in a college classroom, let alone in many places. There is no liberty. It's all controlled. We're controlled by liberal fascism, corrupt atheists, and deviants who try to take away our right to self-defense through the Second Amendment, reducing our property rights, reducing our ability to buy a home. You know, the whole system is something that restricts your liberty quite heavily. And people are very irresponsible now, and they don't know what it means to be accountable towards having a lot of liberty now. So that's how you would get a totalitarian authoritarian, is because the people will realize that the masses have been so dumbed down, they're so animalistic, so hedonistic, cynical, and nihilistic as well, that they're not fit to rule themselves anymore. They need to have strong-armed shepherds, and so your liberties must be curtailed because you don't know what to do with yourself. It's like having a dog on a leash because he runs in front of cars, than a dog who's obedient and is trained and know not to run in front of cars. So the American population, I'd argue now, is really misguided, really doesn't know what to do with all the opportunities that they have. They flounder it and play with breads and circuses. So the Statue of Liberty doesn't have the same meaning that we were told that it was meant. Right? If you can't even speak freely on a dumb app like Facebook or Twitter, and you're heavily censored and you can't call a dude an address of, you know, what he really is, and you have compelled speech and you can lose your job and you can get banned and they can take away your bank account by debanking you, deplatforming you, putting you on a no-fly list. You don't got liberty anymore. You're controlled by some very cynical people. So, us as Muslims, we shouldn't idolize the Statue of Liberty and should advocate for it to be taken down. We don't follow the principles. It's a cultic statue. It's a symbol of New York City, which is a crime haven. Very, de Blasio, Andrew Cuomo, when they were in power, they were just terrible. Terrible rulers, terrible leaders. You thought they were going to do well, they didn't. I mean, it's such a mess, New York City. It's like Gotham City, creating jokers. This is a very interesting section. That's why I really liked this book. I hope you learned something and that you had many things to think about.